certain people become, you know, and there is a little bit of contingency here, a little bit of chance meeting with people in, you know, even in sporting teams or whatever it may be, charismatic individuals who are able to radicalise people, and so there is an element of chance there in combination with these grievances that I was talking about.
You would have to think, though, just from what you've said, Chris, that it does not much good maybe to put them into resettlement programs, some of these people, and then not look after them. In other words, and then they disappear, as they seem to have done in places overseas. They disappear into the community, into relative anonymity. There isn't the ongoing relationship with them. And
do we know that the people who have been arrested were refugees?
No, we don't at all. About the Lebanese people in Australia, no, we don't. I'm just talking generally. You would think that that to make a refugee program long-term successful, you would have to have a long-term relationship.
I think so, but also I don't think that there is any reason for us at this point in time to be suggesting that the refugee community is any more at risk of radicalisation or more prone to terrorism than, you know, many other communities, and you know, so migrants for sure, particularly second generation, the children of migrants, and particularly from countries that have broken down into civil war, very brutal civil war, I think puts some communities at risk, but many other people as well from reasonably stable backgrounds and stable countries, and of course, you know, obviously a lot of the focus is on Islamist terrorism, but there are other forms of radicalisation as well, which other countries, luckily, I think New Zealand's in a very lucky situation, hasn't experienced yet, but many other countries are facing radicalisation by other members of society as well. So I think it's problematic to suggest that we should be concerned about, and I know you talked about the Italian professor. I would have some doubts about whether that's the reason, and we would need a more systematic study to suggest that that's the reason that Italy hasn't had as many or many attacks compared to Britain and France. But at the moment, it's difficult to say that refugees are more prone to terrorism because very few of them have actually ended up. Very few refugees or even the children of refugees have ended up actually committing terrorist atrocities. I think I was reading that only 3 people have been killed in the United States by refugees. So it's
more babies with handguns.
It's a small part of the problem. What's that? Sorry.
Babies with handguns have killed more people.
Yeah. So there is that. But I don't. It's also a bit of a distraction, I guess, to be talking about how many of us die in the bath or whatever it may be. But I mean, terrorism is a problem, and of course, it's also it not only causes deaths and suffering and damage to infrastructure, but also breaks down social cohesion between communities.
Yes.
Which is crucial, and also becomes like a critical juncture in history. And
changes the way the whole society operates.
That's right.
All right. Chris, thank you. Dr. Chris Wilson on the panel. And the music means that we have no more time.
It's a shame. I had a really good thing to say, but I'll have to do it next time.
Yeah. Or just email us.
Okay.
Peter Elliott, thank you so much for your company.
Thank you, mate. Nice to be here.
Lavina Good, thank you, and I hope the drive home is easier for you.
It will be easier. Thanks, Jim, and lovely chatting to you too, Peter.
You too, Lavina. Bye, love.
We're back with another panel tomorrow. Thanks, everybody, and Checkpoint with John Campbell now.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, things appear to be going from bad to worse for Labour. A second disastrous poll result in as many days. Andrew Little will join us tonight, and our Deputy Political Editor Chris Bramwell is looking at what's happening with Labour. We're also talking to Winston Peters, whose figures seem to be up in the second poll. A Fanger business owner says she went to the police and took out a trespass order against Quinn Patterson, the man responsible for the shootings last week, plus a man's 5-month wait for urgent prostate cancer surgery at Dunedin Hospital. Airports in Australia remain on high alert. And how is the $1.5 billion Waterview tunnel affecting traffic in Auckland? All of that and more after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia orana, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The government is scrapping the decile rating system for schools. Schools will be rated by a so-called risk index, which would estimate the number of their students at risk of underachievement. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
The specific indicators used in the risk index aren't finalised, but could include ethnicity, mother's age and the amount of time spent supported by benefits. That rating will stay private and be reviewed every year. The Education Minister, Nikki Kay, says parents have been incorrectly judging schools based on their decile, and the current system is in fact a crude calibration of the socio-economic income of a neighbourhood. Decile funding currently accounts for less than 3% of a school's resources, and Ms Kay says no school will have their funding cut as a result of the change. The risk index is likely to take effect from 2020 at the latest. From Parliament, May Heron.
The Prime Minister says the government could consider tightening online sales of firearms. The Northland man who shot and killed 2 women in Fanger last week bought firearms on the online auction site Trade Me, despite not having a firearms licence. Bill English says if the police investigation into the killings identifies loopholes that need to be fixed, then the government will move to close them.
There is an active online market, and the government has taken some steps in the past to regulate that market a bit better. With respect to these recent events, we want to wait and see just where the police investigation gets to before jumping to conclusions.
The Prime Minister, Bill English. A Labour MP says changing the party leadership at this time would be a disaster. Andrew Little says he talked to senior colleagues about whether he should step aside after 2 dire poll results. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The party recorded its lowest ever result in the One News Colmar-Brunton poll at 24%, and Labour's own internal polling is even worse, giving it 23% support. The party's Napier MP, Stuart Nash, says he backs Andrew Little 100% and urged him to stay on as leader. He says if the party changed leaders this close to an election, it would absolutely implode. The Deputy Leader, Jacinda Ardern, says she's not thinking about a plan B for the party leadership and she's fully backing Andrew Little. She says, of course, Labour would like to see its support higher, but a lot can happen in 7 weeks. Atuiti whare pārimata, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
A former daycare supervisor and teacher has been sentenced to 5 months home detention for assaulting children in her care, all of them under 5. Lynn Euphemia Abraham, who's 59, was earlier found guilty of smacking children, force-feeding some and washing a child's mouth out with soap. Outside the Waitakere District Court, one of the parents complained Abraham should have been given a harsher sentence. The father says her actions have harmed his family tremendously. The police have confirmed 3 girls are being dealt with over the killing of a Hamilton man on Friday night. The police believe Norman Kingi, who was 54, was stabbed when trying to stop a group breaking into a vehicle. 2 girls, aged 13 and 15, have been charged with aggravated wounding and unlawful interference with a motor vehicle. They'll reappear in the Hamilton Youth Court tomorrow. A 12-year-old has been referred to Youth Aid. The awarding of a Victoria Cross to a former railway worker has been celebrated today with the unveiling of a plaque at Wellington Railway Station. Corporal Leslie Andrew, who rose to the rank of Brigadier, won the Victoria Cross for his bravery in an attack on the village of La Basseville, near the border between France and Belgium, 100 years ago today. Anne-Marie May reports.
Leslie Andrew was just 20 years old and a corporal when he played an instrumental role in the capture of 3 German machine gun posts. He led 2 sections of soldiers under a continuous barrage of gunfire to capture 2 of them, and the 3rd was taken when he and another soldier stormed a German trench. Brigadier Andrew's eldest grandchild, Wendy Jenkin, said she remembers him marching in an Anzac Day parade in the 1960s, and he was incredibly loyal to those he served with. Kiwi Rail's Chief Peter Reedy said Leslie Andrew was typical of railway workers of that time, with over 40% of them enlisting to serve the country in the First World War. This is Anne-Marie May.
It's 5:04. To sport, the New Zealand BMX rider Sarah Walker is setting her eyes on a possible 4th Olympic campaign after making the final of the World Championships at the weekend. Walker finished last in the grand final in South Carolina, but she's taking a lot of confidence from managing to battle through injury to make what was her first World Champ final in 3 years.
The field here was outstanding, and We had all the Olympic medalists from Rio, all the Olympic medalists from London, defending world champions. There was no one missing. Looking towards Tokyo, I really think I could be right there.
Sarah Walker won silver at the London Olympics. The New Zealand motor racing driver Scott Dixon has slipped from first to third in the season standings after a disappointing 9th place finish in the latest round at Mid-Ohio. American Joseph Newgarden won the race to shoot to the top of the standings with 4 races left in the season. The reigning domestic netball champions, the Southern Steel, have retained their powerful mid-court trio for next year's title defence. The captain Wendy Frew and Silver Ferns Shannon Francois and Gina Crampton are the first roster signings announced by the Southern franchise. Olympic shot put bronze medalist Tom Walsh is hitting form at the right time, with the World Athletic Champs in London just around the corner. Walsh threw 22.06 metres to win the event at the England Champs. It was his second 22-metre plus throw of the year, but is still some way off what will be needed to knock Olympic champion American Ryan Krauser off his perch. Krauser has beaten Walsh in all 4 of their encounters this year. That's the news.
The Labour leader considers standing aside.
What I said to some senior colleagues last week is, given that result, an option that had to be considered is whether I should continue in that role.
But is it too late?
It would be disastrous for a leader to step out 8 weeks out from the election. Even to be discussing the prospect of stepping aside is as damaging as this poll result in itself.
The Prime Minister is happy with where National's going.
We've kept moving through with infrastructure, with expanding public services, with a focus on the economy. That's what people expect a stable, sensible government to do, and it's what we're doing.
Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, Microsoft's worldwide Health Chief Information Security Officer warns our health data is vulnerable to cyber attack. And after 10, Far North Principal Fraser Smith wrote a book to engage Māori boys, and it's shortlisted for the Best First Book Award. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Cloud increasing tonight with isolated showers from tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine weather. Showers in Hawke's Bay tomorrow evening. Waikato to Wellington, including the central high country. Mostly cloudy, isolated showers developing later today, turning to rain south of Taranaki tomorrow. Wairarapa, fine today, rain tomorrow. Marlborough and Nelson, fine and cloudy areas today, rain developing overnight, easing later tomorrow. Buller, rain setting in and becoming heavy this evening, cloudy and some scattered rain in the north tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, heavy rain clearing from the south this evening and overnight, fine tomorrow. Canterbury to Southland, a few showers, and the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy, a period of rain tomorrow afternoon or evening. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks very much, Katrina. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us. Tonight on the programme, Quinn Patterson and the woman who went to police in Fanger about his theft and his anger. Airports in Australia remain on high alert. The government is scrapping the decile rating system for schools and the debate over whether Christchurch needs a covered stadium. Much more tonight. Actually, it's a busy programme, but we begin with Labour and Andrew Little. The man himself joins us after 6. But he and the party must now grapple with another disastrously poor poll result. As we know, Labour has recorded its lowest ever result in the One News Brunton poll at 24%, and it's been revealed today that the party's latest internal polling is even worse, down a further point at 23%. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
Labour's feeling the pressure just 8 weeks out from the September 23 election. 2 poll results in 2 days both have the party on less than the 25% Labour got at the last election, when it suffered its worst defeat in 92 years. Andrew Little says he has to take responsibility for the poll results, and part of that was discussing his leadership with colleagues last week. But he says he got the message from his MPs they want him to stay on and fight the election.
What I said to some senior colleagues last week is, given that result, an option that had to be considered is whether I should continue in that role. That's an honourable thing to consider given that result, but I am no less diminished in my determination to fight hard in this election.
Under Labour Party rules, the election of a new leader is decided by 40% caucus, 40% party membership and 20% by the unions. But if a leadership vacancy arises in the 3 months before a general election, then a new leader can be elected by a simple caucus vote. Labour's Napier MP Stuart Nash says he backs Andrew Little 100% and has urged him to stay on as leader.
What Andrew has done over the last 2.5 years, and he is being honest. He is not gilding the lily in any way, shape or form. He is telling it as he sees it. And I think this is one of the features of Andrew, which is to his advantage. You're not going to get someone who stands there and tells New Zealand, no, I'm not worried about the leadership whatsoever. We're fine and there's only one poll that we care about, and that's election day. He's being honest.
Stuart Nash absolutely does not support changing the leadership this close to an election.
I think if we did change the leadership, we would absolutely implode. I really believe that. I think it would be a disaster. But what we're going to see in the next 8 weeks is a whole lot of policy rolled out. We haven't even really started the formal campaign period. I know we're in the attributable period, but, writ day hasn't closed. And in the last month, you're going to see some really good stuff come out of Labor, some really good policy, in a much more public way than you're seeing at the moment.
Labour's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson says Andrew Little had a very human reaction to a very disappointing poll result.
As a good, responsible leader, he thought about all of his options. He's made very clear that he is in for the fight. He wants to be there to lead a change of government, to get New Zealand back to a place where we're looking after our people and we're investing in our public services, and we're backing him to do that.
Grant Robertson, who unsuccessfully stood against Mr Little for the Labour leadership, says he's seen no indication that Andrew Little will step down in the run-up to the election.
Andrew has my support. He's been duly elected as the leader of the party. He's been out in front working his guts out for us. He's a tough guy. This is a tough fight, and he said that he's in it to win it, and we're going to back him.
The UMR poll result, which emerged today, has Labour at 23%, but in that poll National has also taken a hit, dropping 5 points to 42. The winners are the Greens, which are up 3 to 15, and New Zealand First up 5 to 16%. Labour's Deputy Leader Jacinda Ardern says the party always has a discussion about lifting its game when it gets a disappointing poll result.
Certainly, no doubt, we want our vote to be higher. But at the same time, you'll hear the Prime Minister talking about how, National is in a position where they'll be needing coalition partners as well. A lot can happen in 7 weeks. We just have to make sure that New Zealanders are hearing the real differences, the different political offerings that are out there, and that they have a chance to make a vote based on the issues rather than distractions.
The former Labour leader David Cunliffe had no comment to make about the situation facing Mr Little and Labour, except this piece of advice: focus on unity and the difference Labour can make for New Zealanders. Atu te whare pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Chris Bramwell.
Andrew Little himself joins us on the programme after 6, and coming up next, Winston Peters. But we thought we'd do one of our pass the phone around polls. Last time a Cafe and Gore that didn't think terribly much of their local MP Todd Barclay. This time, what do people in the tiny West Coast town, often described as the birthplace of the Labour Party, think about the party's current situation? A short time ago, we called the famous pub, now known as formerly the Black Ball Hilton, and we spoke with some of its patrons. We begin with Jeremy, and this is what he had to say about Labour and, in fact, Andrew Little.
I've met the man personally once or twice, and on both occasions I found him to be a reasonable, sensible sort of person, the sort of person I'd like to see looking after our country, quite frankly, compared to some of the people that are candidates. We had another one of them here the other week, and he looks as if he's going to get quite a few votes from around here.
Who's that? Who was that?
Winston was here, shaking hands and looking over our shoulders and saying, "You're all lovely people."
Well, Winston was in the Black Ball pub?
Yeah, he called in to say good day and have a look around.
And what did you think of him?
Well, I've seen him a couple of times recently. Like a lot of politicians, he hasn't got a very tall stature.
You can't blame him for that, though. He didn't choose to be of a non-tall stature, did he?
I think that's probably why Rob...
Muldoon?
Backed him, because, they could probably see eye to eye.
So, are you voting Labour? Will you vote Labour?
Oh, I had a discussion with a person conducting a poll yesterday, and I told them that what I decide on the day is private between me and the pen and the paper.
But would Andrew Little make you more or less likely to vote Labour?
Well, OK, if you like to put it that way, personality-wise, I'd probably be more likely to vote for a Labour Party with him in charge of it than some of the other nitwits they've got in their party.
Jeremy, is there anyone else in the bar?
Yeah, they're all just being very quiet.
Is it? Who's sitting next?
Would you like to speak to someone who's a union member?
Yeah. Who's sitting there? Who have you got?
Oh, I've got Gerald at Grieve here. He's in the Seamen's or something or other union. He's a seafarer.
Can you pass the phone over to him, Jeremy?
Yeah, I'll give him to you.
Thanks, you good bugger. Lovely to talk to you, Jeremy.
Hello.
Hello, it's John Campbell from Radio New Zealand. How are you going?
Good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good. We're just phoning the birthplace of the Labour Party to ask people how they think the Labour Party's going. How do you think they're going?
Rubbish at the moment.
Why is that?
I just think that, as my colleague next door to me is saying, is they're not getting enough support. He's not getting enough support from within his party.
Right, so you don't think Little is the issue, Andrew Little is the issue. You think it's his front bench?
I think so, yes.
Are you a Labour voter?
I am, yes.
Yeah, so can you name the front bench? Who's their finance spokesperson?
It's the...
who's there?
I just have to say it's the gay person.
Who's the?
I don't know his name. Robinson.
Grant Robertson. Who's their health spokesperson?
Their health spokesperson. Yeah, no, non-event.
And so would you normally expect to know that? Would you normally expect to have been sufficiently connected with the Labour Party to be able to identify their front bench to me?
I would say so. Yeah, I would say so.
Right, so is that Andrew Little's fault or the rest of the personnel?
I just think to be fair with you, I think they're all in it just for the coin at the moment. And it doesn't seem like they're progressing very well for the working class people within the country.
Right. So
that's my
right. So you
theory.
Sort of sense that their roots have been abandoned in a way.
Well, I think that the working class people have been disenfranchised by both National, Labour and over the period of time. And we've gone from from severe right to severe left, and we've forgotten about the middle ground that pay the bill. And that's how I personally feel.
Two punters in the hotel formerly known as the Black Ball Hilton, which is in fact its name, formerly known as the Black Ball Hilton. It's coming up to 80 minutes past 5. The UMR poll result, which emerged today, had National taking a drop to 42, down 5 points. The Greens up 3 to 15 and New Zealand First up 5 points to 16%. We're joined now by New Zealand First leader Winston Peters. You there, Mr. Peters?
Good evening.
Good evening. You are in the UMR at 16%. What is your own polling telling you?
Well, something similar, yes.
Okay. Can we clarify the process of negotiation for New Zealand First after the election? Who would you talk to first? It has always been your custom to talk to the party with the most votes at the outset. Is that still the case?
Well, look, being practical, you have to look at the results as a party with all your colleagues, both members of Parliament and members of the board, and form a structure of what you're going to do now, given what you've campaigned on, and bearing that what you've campaigned on is paramount. So when you talk about, in the first instance, talking to parties with serious numbers, well, of course that happens. But that's just a matter of common sense in the first instance.
OK, what are you campaigning on? What is the most important thing for New Zealand First when you go into coalition discussions after the election?
The most paramount thing for New Zealand First, it's in our name. We've seen for 33 years where the interests of this country and its sovereignty have been not the primary thing in the mind of parliamentarians, but a blind ideology, which after 33 years we know doesn't work.
OK, in policy terms, what do you want?
Well, in policy terms, we want a country to be restored to its place in the world economically, which we once, for long periods of time, used to occupy. That is a country that was envy of the rest of the world. And we still have got the capacity to do that, but not with the present policies.
OK, so what policies do you think will make a difference? What will you say to National? What do you want?
Well, there's nothing so sort of how shall I put it, concertina. You could just do it in this interview with you now. But let me tell you the flavour of it.
Give me an example. Give me one thing. Give me one thing.
I'll give you an example. Exports are declining, not rising. The government's been talking about $62 billion of exports by 2025, and it's going up now at less than 1%. So all of these things are being put out with tremendous sort of Goebbels-like propaganda, but none of that's the reality. And take housing. Just comes out from Auckland City Council today that we're going at less than 7,000 when they need 14,000. Now, that's not what the public's been told. In Parliament or outside of it, there's just been a plethora of propaganda, and reality is different. We want the reality to be the performance which our country could be proud of, and we are stating it out there in the provinces and regions because we know that out there the chance of us creating real wealth offshore to bring home to the family in New Zealand is what our campaign's about.
Can you work with both sides? Can you work with National, and can you work with Labour and the Greens?
Look, I've got to say I regret this, not your question, but the shape of this campaign, because a whole lot of parties are out there making claims about their capacity to be the government. They have never spoken to us. They've never ever had these agreements which they keep telling the public they've got, and it's simply false. We're in a battle for a dramatic economic and social change of this country. We're not in a battle to continue the same thing merely for power.
Okay.
And I want to make that very, very clear.
Okay, so you haven't. So there have been no formal approaches to you, although you often say when there are approaches, hey, let's wait and see how the cards are fallen after election night. Theoretically, can you work with National, and can you work with Labour and the Greens?
We cannot work with either of those combinations if they intend to carry on with a few tweaks with the present economic and social policy. We want a dramatic change. We know what our country is capable of. We look at countries like Singapore, Scandinavia, and dare I say it, at Australia, which everyone's scoffing at. But Australia has done far better than us over the last 30 years. And we want there to be some accountability and a dramatic change in where we are going as a country, so we use our resources for New Zealanders. What we got here, we've got 226,000 people with work visas. We've got record 73,000 net immigrants coming in. We've got massive offshore ownership. We have to stop what's going on here so we take control of our lives and of our country. And out there in New Zealand, I tell you something, New Zealanders want control back of their lives. They're sick of just working flat out, paying taxes and treading water.
One final question. What do you want?
What I want, I can tell you now bluntly, we cannot do anything for this country without we don't maximise our votes to the hilt. And I want the best outcome New Zealand First has ever had as a political party in our 24 years.
Right, and what does that mean for you? Where do you want to be?
Well, it means for New Zealand First, and we want to be...
No, for you. No, for you personally. And I'm going to press you on this. Where do you want to be sitting?
I want to be talking to you on election night at about 8:15. I explain to you why there is a dramatic change guaranteed now to happen. That's where I want to be.
Do you want to be Prime Minister?
You know, I have never run for any job apart from being an MP in my whole career.
Winston Peters joining us live on the phone. It's 5:23. We will talk to Andrew Little at length after 6. As police continue their investigation into the shooting near Fanger last week, which left 2 local women and the gunman himself dead, Checkpoint has been told police had been told about Quinn Patterson's issues with anger. A local business owner who employed Quinn Patterson says she went to the police about him and later took out a trespass order after he stole from her business and responded angrily when she confronted him about that theft. The business owner, who asked not to be named, says Mr Patterson was manipulative, stole thousands of dollars worth of goods from her business and had anger issues. She says she went to the police and they weren't interested.
Quinn worked for me as a floor person, and he was living in a tent in a caravan park at that stage, in just out of Kaimai, and he was pretty self-sufficient in the caravan park. He lived in a tent with an annex, and over a period of time, it was funny because we lived next door to a super sergeant in Whangarei, and his wife was my administration in the office. And I used to have Fridays off, and one Friday I went in without notice and noticed that Quinn had picked up his goods that he'd bought but not paid for them. So on further investigation, I found out that over a period of months this had been his practice and no one was monitoring it. And so I did some investigation and further investigation and found out that he was registering at each auction under another name. Like, this is a big auction, right? And so I went snooping around his house because everything has lot numbers on it. And I could trace back the lot numbers to find that those items were unpaid for but gone. So I took all this information to the police, and they sent someone in to look at it, and then he started to get really threatening on the premises. So, a trespass order is easy to do. You don't need the police involved to do that. You can serve them yourself. And he wasn't, to me, he was never showed any signs of mental illness, John. He was just a very manipulative and very clever con man. Do you know what I mean?
And so did you go to the police with concerns about his anger?
Yep. I sure did.
And what did they say to you?
They came and talked to me about it and said that he hadn't done anything, so therefore they couldn't do anything.
Do you feel like you should have been taken more seriously when you went to the police, or do you think it was legitimate to hear your concerns and say there's not much we can do really?
Well, I actually believe that they should have followed through a bit closer. I think really the thing is that I had proof that he had been embezzling, and, that's employment. Not only was he committing fraud, but he was also stealing from me. And then when confronted and getting angry, I believe they should have followed through on that, definitely.
How angry did he get? What did his anger mean?
Just very abusive, screaming and yelling and having a temper tantrum. But I never saw that a side of Quinn that told me that he was mentally unstable. So I think that's a fairly new diagnosis for him. He had windows boarded and things. I think it's a real shame that those two women didn't go with someone. I mean, they knew the concerns. I mean, the gossip in Whangarei was right about him.
So what did the police say to you? Did they just say, look, there's nothing for us to proceed on here, despite the fact that...
Pretty much in a nutshell, really, that even though I supplied the proof, it gets to the point when you own a business and someone does that and you ring the police and you ask to follow up like 5 times afterwards, you're too busy running your business and running your own life to keep following it up, And yes, there's things I regret. I probably should have, because it cost me a lot of money.
So you were able to provide proof that Quinn had stolen goods from you.
Absolutely.
And this is theft as a servant, right? Because he was working for you at the time.
Absolutely.
And you were absolutely able to provide evidence of that to the police. You went to the police. Did you go back to the police? Did you go more than once?
I went once, and then I'd follow up phone calls. Can you tell me what's happening? Can you tell me what's happening? But, to them it wasn't a priority, really.
We asked police for an interview today. We were told Superintendent Russell Lapru is on pre-approved annual leave, but he did give us a statement. The investigation will look into the circumstances that led to the event and the history of Quinn Patterson. While the investigation is ongoing, police are unable to answer specific questions which may be relevant to the inquiries police are making. When information in relation to this matter and the police investigation is available for release, this will be done proactively. We are talking to people in Whangarei who have had dealings with Quinn Patterson. If you're one of them, we would love to hear from you, particularly if you had approached the police about him. Please text us on 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and we are able to talk to you in confidence, of course. It's coming up to 5:30. Coming up on Checkpoint, the Labour leader Andrew Little joins us. Australia's airports remain on high alert. The government scraps the decile rating system for schools. Does Christchurch need a covered stadium? This is a big talking point in the city. And the impact of the Waterview tunnel on Auckland traffic congestion. Is it making a difference? All of that coming up. Plus, Nona is back with us this week doing business, but for only about the second time in 18 months. Here's Katrina Batten with the 5:30 headlines at 5:30.
Have a little celebration. A second case of the cattle disease Mycoplasma bovis has been found in South Canterbury. The farm is linked to the first property under investigation and is part of the 16-farm Van Leeuwen dairy group. The Ministry for Primary Industries says the latest find was not unexpected given close connections between the two farms. In the first case, all 150 infected cows had to be put down. The government is scrapping the school decile rating system. Instead, a new risk index will estimate the number of their students at risk of underachievement. The criteria is yet to be finalised, but could include ethnicity, mother's age and the amount of time spent supported by benefits. The rating, which will be up and running by 2020, will be kept private and reviewed every year. The Prime Minister is promising to make it harder for firearms to be bought and sold online if problems are identified with the law. A Northland man who shot and killed 2 women in Fanger last week bought firearms on the online auction site Trade Me, despite not having a firearms licence. Bill English says if the police investigation into the killings find loopholes in the law, the government will move to close them. Labour's Deputy Jacinda Ardern is backing Andrew Little as leader, saying he's acting in an open and honest way. Mr Little consulted senior colleagues about staying on when Labour dropped to 24% in the One News Colmar-Brunton poll. Now the party's internal UMR poll has it at 23%, 6 points down from June. A former daycare supervisor has been sentenced to 5 months home detention for smacking and forced feeding children under 5 in her care and washing one child's mouth out with soap. One parent has complained that 59-year-old Lynn Euphemia Abraham should have been given a harsher sentence, saying her actions have harmed his family tremendously. And the debate over whether Christchurch needs a covered stadium has reignited after consecutive low turnouts for 2 of the Crusaders' biggest games of the year. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you so much, Katrina, which is 27.5 minutes away. Nona Peltier is back doing business with us this week. Lovely to have you back with us, Nona.
Thank you.
Former fund manager for Milford Asset Management, who was judged to have manipulated share market trading, has withdrawn his appeal against a High Court judgment. What's the background to this story?
Well, this is this fella who was the FMA, which is the Financial Markets Authority, brought an action against him, a civil action, saying that he basically manipulated the market and so on. And he was judged that he had, and he was fined $400,000, and he was also barred from trading for 5 years, a company, managing a company and also trading. So yeah, it was a fairly severe penalty.
Yeah, it was.
And so he appealed, but he's dropped that appeal now. And so the FMA was also appealing, sort of a cross action, and they've both dropped the action, so that's the end of the story.
So it remains a victory for the FMA, doesn't it?
Yes, it sure does. Yeah. And it was the first time that the FMA brought this kind of an action, but then again, the regulations are fairly new. So.
Yeah, that's right.
And you would expect that they are keeping a pretty close eye.
It was quite a big branding exercise for the FMA at the time. In other words, it was an example, particularly in the context of the fine, which was substantial, of what they could do and would do.
Yes, and this was in 2014, and we've seen since then the FMA has taken actions against others in different situations, but yeah, they are certainly using their powers to enforce the rules for sure. And you can expect that. We'll see the tougher trading conditions across the markets, and I fair enough too, because people are putting their nest eggs there, and if they're not feeling that the market is being manipulated, it's good enough that they should be on the job. That's what we get them for.
Investment and business confidence holding steady?
Yes, we had a couple of confidence surveys today. We had an investor confidence survey from the ASB, and that showed that investor confidence is a little more cautious than we've seen in the past, and that's partly because our assets are fully priced, and that's like the market is at the top value, interest rates are low, property prices are high. So, yeah, investors are a little bit cautious about where they're putting their money.
In short, the potential for downside is now being marked, right?
Well, there's an election coming, and that always puts a chill on the market, not to mention the poor weather. So it's fairly cold. That always kind of puts people off, doesn't it? But in any case, so that fell a couple of points to 23% in the next in the 3 months ending in June, and that compares with a net 9% a year ago. In any case, those numbers are more important that, in fact, investors are being a little bit cautious. Business confidence, though, is holding fairly steady, and that's in the same kind of an environment. The ANZ's monthly confidence survey has shown that there's been a little bit of a change in the business confidence. Companies are upbeat about their own outlook, and they plan to hire more staff, but unfortunately, they just can't find those people, and that's putting a bit of a strain on economic growth. So we're still looking at an economy that's booming ahead. And according to the chief economist at the ANZ Bank, there's not really any speed bumps ahead. And right now, of course, there's the election. That is a little bit of a factor, and we're seeing that across all kinds of surveys. Yeah.
What did the markets do today, Nana?
Well, actually, they did pretty well. Overall, the markets in Asia and everywhere is looking pretty up. The NZX Top 50 Index rose 0.7%, so that's 0.75%. That's a lot. 54 points to 7,694. Close to a record, but not quite. And the dollar is steady at 75.1 US cents, 94 Australian, and 57.2 pence.
Nona Peltier, our business reporter here in Auckland. Thank you. Let's head to Otago, where a Palmerston man, this is Palmerston that's just north of Dunedin, of course, says he's still waiting for urgent prostate cancer surgery at Dunedin Hospital after a confirmed diagnosis from a biopsy in February. And he says he's been told 7 other patients are in the same boat. Last week, Checkpoint brought you stories of people who've had their surgery postponed several times due to a lack of ICU beds at the hospital. On some occasions, the patients had even stayed overnight in hospital, been prepped for their operations. The surgical team and the theatre was good to go, but no ICU beds, postponement. One family told us their father had died after his cardiac surgery was postponed 4 times. Paul Schofield was diagnosed with prostate cancer in February after paying for his own biopsy to speed the process up, the results of which he took to Dunedin Hospital.
I asked him how long before the surgery, and he said, well, it would. The government requirements were for the surgery to be done within 2 to 3 months of the biopsy or the confirmation of the diagnosis, and things moved pretty rapidly from there. I had a call from the hospital, and they carried out the pre-anaesthetist checks, and then a couple of weeks later I saw a nurse who told me about post-operative care and all this sort of thing, and I thought, gee, this is moving quite well.
And when was that? When was that stuff happening, Paul?
That was all happening within a month or so of Mr. Smalia sending a letter to the hospital.
So what month are we talking about there? We're talking about February that this was going on? Right, okay. So you have your biopsy, which you do in private so that you can actually get the damn thing done. The hospital comes back...
Just to confirm what was happening and what sort of seriousness it was, the various types of cancers and so on, and that's why we did that, yeah.
And then the hospital swung into action in a way that was encouraging and impressive, and you thought, gosh, you're on the tracks here and some treatment's going to happen. So this was taking place in February, it's now August. Have you had the surgery?
No. No, I actually wondered, nothing sort of, it all stopped then.
And did they tell you why?
No. Just that's all it was. No, we don't know. So anyway, I then waited a couple of weeks more, and then I sent a letter to the hospital advocacy group requesting that, when would I like to see the surgery? And look, if they don't have the facilities or whatever to carry out the surgery, would they please look at transferring me to another area who did have the facilities to do the job,
Have you had a reply?
I actually haven't been given any nothing and no writing as to why it's not going forward. There's no critical explanation. There's no one can say, oh, look, we've booked you in on the 5th of June, all going well, we'll expect to get this done by then. Nothing.
So you've had a biopsy, you've been diagnosed with prostate cancer, you've been told by the hospital initially that there needs to be surgery and it needs to be done relatively expeditiously. Yeah. It hasn't happened and you really haven't heard from anyone since?
No.
Are there other people that you know of in a similar position?
I understand there are, from, communications I've had, that yes, there's other people waiting for surgery too. Some of them have been waiting for some time.
How many do you know?
I was told 7.
Right, and you were told that by the hospital?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And they, like you, are waiting without any sense of a date for surgery?
I honestly, I don't know. I don't know what their private circumstances are, but, there's obviously people waiting for surgery who haven't had it done, and it's quite worrying when you think, you're sitting around waiting, things are gradually deteriorating while you're waiting for surgery.
Paul Schofield, we asked the Southern DHB for a response both on how many people are waiting times, and when Mr Schofield might expect to have his surgery. That diagnosis right back at the beginning of the year. It said it would come back to us with that information tomorrow, which we appreciate. It's 90 minutes to 6. Airports in Australia remain on high alert as more details emerge about a plot by 4 men to bring down a plane at Sydney Airport. The men were arrested in counter-terrorism raids in 4 Sydney suburbs on Saturday afternoon and are now being detained under special terrorism powers. The ABC's Stephen Smiley has the latest.
Surrey Hills in inner city Sydney is best known these days for being home to some of the city's trendiest bars and restaurants, with the real estate prices to match. But this morning, its residents were coming to terms with the fact their suburb is the focus of Australia's latest counter-terrorism raid.
It's obviously a little bit distressing, but then again, I've just come back from Europe and there's terror raids everywhere there, and it's really different to Australia. There's definitely not that much police action here.
If you let terrorists win by not doing anything and staying at home, they're winning. You just have to do your own daily stuff. I went for a coffee, right in front of where this alleged, plot was happening. You just have to.
I think the government takes measures, about all this. So I reckon it's good, yeah. We're supposed to feel safe. And I think it's safer than other countries like America, from what I hear,
Police are continuing to sweep the property on Cleveland Street in Surrey Hills today, as well as 4 other properties they've raided in Punchbowl, Wiley Park and Lakemba in the western suburbs. Police are confident they've arrested all members of an alleged terrorist cell plotting to blow up an aircraft out of Sydney Airport. It's understood items that could have been used to make a homemade bomb, including a meat grinder machine, were found at the Surrey Hills Terrace House. Among those detained under special counter-terrorism powers are a father and son, Khaled and Mahmoud Khayat. And 2 other men, Khaled and Abdul Mehi, are believed to be related, but it's unclear how. Andrew Colvin is the Commissioner of the Australian Federal Police.
I think the important point here is that the intelligence was received. Police and our security partners have acted very quickly to stop and disrupt another attempted attack in this country. I know there's been some reporting about what we should or shouldn't have known. I think what we need to focus on is we did find out, we did act on it, and we have once again been able to disrupt.
In the aftermath to the raid, security measures have been tightened at airports across the country. It might just be a temporary precaution, according to Melbourne Airport spokesman Grant Smith.
They aim to get to the airport earlier than they normally would. So 2 hours ahead of a domestic flight or 3 hours ahead of an international flight, just to allow some additional time for the enhanced security that's in place at the moment.
At Tullamarine this morning, most travellers said they didn't mind the extra checks, although some grumbled about the inconvenience.
Is the security force that inefficient that they can't... Yeah, they caught the guys, so why the carry on?
I think Australia's a very safe country. And, they're doing all the right measures. I think it's more worrying overseas, but I think that, you have to take the right precautions and I think we all have to do our bit as a community just to suffer the delays.
Security expert Neil Fergus, the CEO of the Intelligent Risks Group, has twice reviewed security protocols for the federal government at Australian airports and has also advised the TSA in the United States.
At the moment, we're seeing a quite, I suspect, disproportionate response
just until such time as the Office of Transport Security and Government can sit down and work out what really needs to be kept in place longer term.
A magistrate has granted an extension to the special detention of the 4 men arrested in the raids. They can now be held without charge for a further 6 days while police continue their investigations.
Stephen Smiley from the ABC with that report. It's exactly 6:45. The police have revealed that 3 young females are alleged to have been involved in the fatal stabbing of a Hamilton man at the weekend. Norman Kingi was stabbed as he tried to stop a vehicle theft in Ranui Street on Friday night. His death has sparked renewed calls from local leaders for community policing to be strengthened in that particular area of Hamilton. Joe O'Brien reports.
2 females aged 15 and 13 will reappear in the Hamilton Youth Court on Wednesday after earlier being charged with aggravated wounding and unlawful interference with a motor vehicle. A 12-year-old girl has been referred to Youth Aid for matters relating to Mr Kingi's death. Locals in the Hamilton suburb of Norton, where he died, were reluctant to comment, but one community worker who didn't want to be identified says more needs to be done to prevent such tragedies.
Something needs to be done about our rangatahi that are roaming the streets, uneducated, have nothing better to do than go out stealing, going out and committing crime.
The community worker says while there are lots of positive initiatives for young people in the area, there are growing concerns about crime and safety following the loss of community police officers several years ago.
Aroha mai to that man and the loss, I can feel where his family's coming from, but also us here that live here within Norton, we don't have much security.
It's a concern echoed by Hamilton-based Labour-list MP Sue Moroney, who says she was asked to come along to Mr Kingi's rugby club rooms in Frankton yesterday. She says there was a huge gathering of friends and supporters who are shocked by what's happening in their community.
People told me that having cars being broken into is escalating. They're concerned about the youth crime and how out of control that's getting, and they're just devastated about what's happened. They've told me that Norm was one of the best people you could ever hope to come across, and effectively on that tragic night, him and his wife were doing the right thing. They were trying to protect their community.
Sue Moroney says community police are being stripped away from the city's streets, and she's outraged the Law and Order Select Committee refused to hear from petitioners calling for their reinstatement earlier this year.
We've had now shootings and murders on the streets of Melville. We've now had a stabbing and a murder on the streets of Norton. Those were 2 communities that 3 or 4 years ago had great community cops operating in their community, and they've been taken away. And now what we see is the escalation of petty crimes culminating in these sorts of tragedies.
Western Community Centre Manager Neil Tolan agrees a lack of community policing has taken a toll.
Yeah, they were right across the community and they lived and breathed it, so they knew the contacts, knew the networks, and they had the trust with the community, so the community would go to them if there was any underlying issues.
And so that's not happening now?
It's not, and I don't think the police can do that, just with the limited resources they have. They're definitely stretched at the community level.
Hamilton Councillor James Casson, who was the officer in charge of the North Hamilton Community Policing Centre, says local officers are telling him they're overworked and frustrated they're not able to undertake more grassroots policing.
The police aren't out in the community as much as they used to be and have lost a lot of face-to-face. A lot of that's not happening now. So the poor buggers on the street are going from job to job to job and haven't got a lot of time for proactive policing. It's just the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff.
But Hamilton West MP National's Tim McIndoe says while Mr Kingi's death is tragic, care should be taken not to rush to judgment on the basis of one incident. He says the government is committed to substantially increase police numbers.
In my own region, the Waikato region, we are getting an extra 100 police. The first tranche of those new police recruits are in training now, and so we'll have more on the streets of the region very, very soon.
The police deny there has been any loss of community policing in the city. In a statement, Area Commander Bruce Bird says there is now a focus on particular groups of people and locations with strong community patrols and school community officers. For Checkpoint i Kirikiriroa, ko Joe O'Brien tēnei.
It costs $1.5 billion, and assessments of whether that's been money well spent will take longer, but the initial numbers on traffic changes in Auckland following the opening of the Waterview tunnel a month ago suggest a measurable difference. That's been the feedback on social media since the tunnel opened, but now NZTA have some hard and fast numbers. Here's System Designs Manager for NZTA, Brett Glidden.
We're seeing significant travel time improvements on the trip from the CBD to the airport and in return in the morning and afternoon peaks by up to 20 to 25 minutes. We're seeing a measurable amount of traffic move off State Highway 1 southbound onto State Highway 20, so we're seeing a real rebalance from State Highway 1 to State Highway 20 of about 77% in total kilometres travelled on State Highway 1.
So can you explain that to me? You've lost me a bit there. So this is from people who are on the southern going across to the western?
Yeah, so if you're coming up the southern motorway, what we're seeing is the total kilometres travelled on the southern motorway by every vehicle has reduced by 7%, which means that they're no longer on the southern motorway. They've gone off at Manukau onto State Highway 20 through the tunnels and either to the central motorway junction and the CBD in that direction or out to the west. So we're seeing quite a substantial number of people divert away from State Highway 1. So it has a positive for both sides. It better balances the network and takes a little bit of pressure off State Highway 1, which people will be seeing as well.
And those main routes, suburban routes, Sandringham Road, Dominion Roads, along Carrington there, big reductions in traffic there, I understand?
Yeah, huge reductions in traffic there. On Stoddard Road, we're seeing about 12,000 vehicles a day less travel along Stoddard Road. That's probably the biggest reduction, but some of the others we're seeing 5,000 to 8,000 vehicles less traffic a day travelling on some of those key arterials through those suburbs, which people are seeing every day now.
And so this is materially reducing people's travel time, right? To and from work, to and from school, wherever they're going.
It has, yeah, and I think that's the positive feedback you're seeing on social media. There's story after story about how it's changed people's travel patterns around the city. And not just in those locations, even people from the North Shore are talking about it out east, depending on where they're travelling. I travel to the airport from the North Shore and I've noticed a considerable difference in my journey time getting to and from the airport.
What about the number of vehicles going through the tunnel each day, the Waterview tunnel? How many cars have you got going through there a day?
Yeah, we're getting about 60,000 vehicles a day, so that's a big amount. The Auckland Harbour Bridge is about 80,000. The busiest part of the motorway, which is between Kaiba and Gillies, is about 100,000. So we've got 60,000 a day through the tunnel, so that's getting up there as one of our busiest sections of road. And we've already had over 1.5 million vehicles travel through the tunnel in total in the first month since it's opened. So the numbers are quite staggering.
Yes, so that is 60,000 compared to 80,000 on the Harbour Bridge. How does 60,000 compare to other main roads in Auckland?
Oh, it would be up there in the top 5 for roads across Auckland. There might be a couple of other arterials like Great South Road that would be getting similar sort of numbers, but as far as total vehicles across the motorway network, it would be probably the 3rd or 4th busiest section now.
Right, and if they're going through the Waterview Tunnel, they're not going on other roads. So you said Stoddard Road. What are the other biggest beneficiaries, do you think?
Oh, so lots of those key arterials, so Dominion Road, Richardson Road, have seen quite substantial reductions of 8,000 odd vehicles. New York Road is about 3,500 vehicles left less on that road, plus the reduction on State Highway 1. So overall what it means is we're seeing a much better balance of the network. So I think that completing that link has meant that traffic has come off some roads that were heavily congested, added to other roads that weren't so heavily congested, and we're seeing an overall better balance across the entire network.
That's Brett Glidden from NZTA. The government is being urged to pay for driving lessons for high school students to boost their employment prospects. The call follows a study from the Institute of Economic Research which shows half of 18 to 24-year-old unemployed job seekers don't have a licence. Emile Donovan reports.
About 4 hours ago, Manaia Apiata from Kuranui College was among 3 Wairarapa teenagers who passed their restricted driver's licence tests. And in case you've forgotten what a big deal that is, it's a big deal.
So I have a part-time job. Sometimes it's hard for me to get there and back if I don't have a ride there. And now I'm allowed to drive within the hours. I'm allowed to drive by myself and take myself there. It's so good. It's such a good feeling.
And Ms. Apiata is in no doubt about who she has to thank. In June last year, Bruce Pauling, who runs the local Road Safety Council, noticed a lot of teenagers were leaving high school without driver's licences.
some of our people were a bit disadvantaged and a bit behind the eight ball because they didn't have reliable mentors or coaches, to teach them those skills, no access to vehicles and things like that.
So Mr. Pauling decided to offer local students free driving lessons. The concept is simple. Local high schools put forward the names of students who might otherwise have a tough time getting driving lessons. After being assessed by a professional driving instructor, they are buddied up with a mentor who takes them out for about an hour each week. After 10 weeks, they're assessed again, and if they make the cut, they sit the restricted licence test. Mark Shepherd is one of those mentors, and he says making the lessons available through school is a stroke of genius.
We got people within the schools that have given up their time to oversee all of this, but you also get the buy-in from the schools and you get the buy-in from the kids, because it's like anything. Well, if you don't turn up to school, you're not going to be there to go for your driving lesson. So it's a bit of a double-sider, you're getting positive out of it.
The region's district councils and local businesses have also chipped in, offering a car to use, covering petrol costs and the instructors' wages as well. And the plan is working. Since last October, 15 local students have been through the program, with only one failing their restricted test. Bruce Pauling says given the program's success, he'd like to see the government pay for driving lessons for any high school students who want them.
It is, especially nowadays, it's a skill, it's a qualification for life, and it gets real outcomes. If it could be funded, by central government perhaps, to me it's a no-brainer. With our young driver statistics and employment statistics, why not?
And Manaya Apiata agrees.
Yeah, I definitely would, because if it wasn't for this, then I don't reckon I would have got my restricted. I probably would have waited until something had happened, and I told my mates that I'd do it, and it's getting out to them and they want to jump on board, and it's just been really good.
In a statement, the Education Minister, Nikki Kay, says schools can already use top-up funding to offer driving lessons. She says ultimately that decision is made by individual schools' boards of trustees. For Checkpoint, Emile Donovan.
A railway worker whose First World War heroism won him the Victoria Cross has been honoured with a plaque at Wellington's main train station. His name was Leslie Andrew, and our reporter Anne-Marie May attended the unveiling.
The ceremony for Corporal Leslie Andrew began with a karakia. He was just 20 years old when he played an instrumental role in the capture of 3 German machine gun posts. Corporal Andrew led 2 sections of soldiers under a continuous barrage of gunfire to capture 2 of them, and the third was taken when he and another soldier stormed a German trench, risking their own lives. Brigadier Andrew's eldest grandchild, Wendy Jenkins, told the gathering her grandfather came back from the war with a piece of shrapnel embedded in his neck, which as children they used to prod. It was never removed, so a small piece of German memorabilia went with him to his grave. Wendy Jenkins said she could still remember him marching in an Anzac Day parade in the 1960s, and he was a man of impeccable manners.
He was very loyal to his comrades in the 22nd Battalion and to his family, and great integrity and strength. He sort of felt power.
Leslie Andrew was one of 11 New Zealanders awarded the Victoria Cross in the First World War. His plaque was unveiled by Corporal Willie Apiata, who was the first recipient of the Victoria Cross for New Zealand, an award under a new system instituted in 1999 to replace Commonwealth honours. The Defence Minister Mark Mitchell said it would be a considerable understatement to say merely that Corporal Andrew showed valour in the face of the enemy.
The citation for his award refers to most conspicuous bravery, cool daring, initiative and fine leadership, and his magnificent example was a great stimulant to his comrades.
The head of Kiwi Rail, Peter Reedy, told the gathering in many ways Corporal Andrew was typical of railway workers of that time.
If you think back to that time, we had over 20,000 employees, and over 40% of those employees gave up their service to go and spend time to defend this country in World War I. It's an enormous contribution by one organisation to that war effort.
Leslie Andrew's grandson, Jeremy Matthews, drew a parallel between his grandfather's actions in the war and the hard-working pioneers of New Zealand's railway system.
Just like the rail lines that have lasted all this time, so too will this plaque, a treasure for all New Zealanders to stop for a moment on their travel and remember the sacrifices made for them all those years ago and enjoy the society we live in today. I hara takitoa, I te toa takitaho, inari, I toa takimaru. My strength is not that of an individual, but that of the collective.
Two of Leslie Andrews' great-grandsons laid a wreath under the plaque. Leslie Andrew died in 1969 and is buried at the Levin RSA Cemetery. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. It's coming up to 6 o'clock. Katrina is standing by with the news. After 6, we will be talking at length with Andrew Little.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. A second case of the cattle disease Mycoplasma bovis has been found in South Canterbury. The farm and the property where the first case was confirmed last week are part of the 16-farm Van Leeuwen dairy group. 150 infected cows were put down at the first property. The Ministry for Primary Industries says the detection is not unexpected given close connections between the farms. It's continuing testing on all farms in the company as well as neighbouring properties. Mycoplasma bovis can cause lameness, pneumonia, mastitis and death in cows and calves, but the disease is not harmful to humans. Labour's Deputy Jacinda Ardern is fully backing Andrew Little as leader, saying he's acting in an open and honest way. Mr Little consulted senior colleagues late last week about whether he should stay on after Labour recorded 24% in the One News Colmar-Brunton poll. A second poll has Labour's support dropping. The party's internal UMR poll has it at 23%, down 6 points from June. Ms Ardern says she's firmly focused on boosting her party's support in the run-up to the election.
I'm not thinking about plan Bs. You know, the focus has to be on the election that we have in 8 weeks' time. And so my focus is supporting Andrew and doing my bit and making sure that we run the best campaign that we can.
Jacinda Ardern. The UMR poll also has National down 5 points to 42%. The Greens are up 3 to 15%, with New Zealand First jumping from 11 to 16%. The government has confirmed it will scrap the decile rating system for schools, replacing it with funding specifically targeted at disadvantaged children. Schools will be rated by a risk index, which will estimate the number of their students at risk of underachievement. The Education Minister, Nikki Kaye, says that rating will stay private and be reviewed every year. The criteria have yet to be finalised. The current decile system distributes funding on the basis of neighbourhood characteristics. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro is claiming victory in the country's controversial election for a constituent assembly. The assembly will be able to rewrite the constitution, and the opposition says it's a power grab by the president. Officials say 41.5% of eligible voters cast ballots in the election, which was widely boycotted by opposition supporters. The police in Sydney are confident they've arrested all members of a terrorist cell they believe was plotting to put a bomb on a plane at Sydney Airport. 4 men are being detained under special terrorism powers after being arrested in counter-terror raids on Saturday night. Security at all of Australia's major airports has been tightened. The ABC's Siobhan Fogarty has more.
The group who was arrested on the weekend over the alleged terrorism plot to blow up a plane remain in custody. AFP Commissioner Andrew Colvin says they are working to keep the men for 7 days without charge under special terrorism powers.
The specificity of what was to be attacked, when it was to be attacked, is something that we are investigating.
The ABC has been told the men allegedly planned to conceal the bomb in a kitchen meat grinder before smuggling it onto a plane.
Siobhan Fogarty in Sydney. A former daycare supervisor and teacher has been sentenced to 5 months home detention for assaulting children in her care. Lynn Euphemia Abraham, who's 59, was earlier found guilty of smacking children, force-feeding some and washing a child's mouth out with soap. All the victims were under 5. Outside the Waitakere District Court, one of the parents complained Ms Abraham should have been given a harsher sentence.
Doesn't really fit the crime at all, not very happy about it, no. It's not setting a very good example for anyone that could possibly do it in the future. They'll just get off scotch-free.
The father says Lynn Abraham breached his trust and her actions have harmed his family tremendously. The debate over whether Christchurch needs a covered stadium has reignited after consecutive low turnouts for two of the Crusaders' biggest games of the year. The temporary AMI stadium was almost half empty for last Saturday's semi-final against the Chiefs as temperatures plummeted. Even fewer turned out the previous weekend in heavy rain. A new stadium isn't planned until 2025. The Chief Executive of Crusaders Rugby, Hamish Riak, says it needs to happen before then and it needs to be covered. He says there's a direct correlation between bad weather and low turnouts.
We could see it in our ticket sales during the week, started off pretty positively and they were selling well. And then we had a forecast that another southerly was coming through and the ticket sales just stopped. So we know that it was people thinking about the weather and thinking about their experience at the stadium.
Hamish Riak, the head of Crusaders Rugby. It's 6:05. To sport, the Australian rugby player Alan Alatoa says the team has mental blocks to get over when they meet the All Blacks next month. The Wallabies' record against the All Blacks has been poor in recent years, and Australia is also licking its wounds after a disastrous Super Rugby season. Alatoa says half the battle will be psychological.
You just have to mentally put that all aside and, when you come out against them, you just have to give it your all, I believe, yeah. So even when you're out there, you're going to expect a tough battle. When it comes down to those dying moments in the game, you just have to mentally pick yourself back up and then back yourself physically. Wallabies
prop Alan Alatoa. The New Zealand BMX rider Sarah Walker isn't upset about finishing in last place in the final of the World Champs in the United States after an injury-plagued couple of seasons. It was the first time Walker made a World Championship final in 3 years, and she hasn't raced for 2 months.
To be in the final, the last final was 2014 and the last final before that was 2011, so I'm really proud of myself.
Sarah Walker. The reigning domestic netball champions, the Southern Steel, have retained their powerful mid-court trio for next year's title defence. The captain Wendy Frew, the Silver Ferns Shannon Francois and Gina Crampton are the first roster signings announced by the Southern franchise. And there are reports Rory McIlroy has sacked his long-time caddy JP Fitzgerald, ending a partnership that took the Northern Irishman to 4 major titles. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's new research on animals and their ability to feel pain, or maybe more importantly, our ability to appreciate how much pain they're in, given we can't speak their language. Massey University's Dr. Preet Singh has the latest. Sean Hendy has the latest physics. And if you missed Lloyd Scott's delightful interview with Eva Radich on Upbeat, you get another chance to hear it on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Cloud increasing tonight with isolated showers from tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne at Hawke's Bay, fine weather. Showers in Hawke's Bay tomorrow evening. Waikato to Wellington, including the central high country. Mostly cloudy, isolated showers developing later today, turning to rain south of Taranaki tomorrow. Wairarapa, fine today with rain tomorrow. Marlborough and Nelson, fine and cloudy areas today. Rain developing overnight, easing later tomorrow. Bulla, rain setting in and becoming heavy this evening. Cloudy and some scattered rain in the north tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, heavy rain clearing from the south this evening and overnight, fine tomorrow. Canterbury to Southland, a few showers, and the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy. A period of rain tomorrow afternoon or evening. It's 8:06 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina Batten. The Labour Party has suffered another polling blow. An internal UMR poll has put support for the party at 23%, 1 percentage point lower than a shock One News Colmar Brunton poll released yesterday. TV3 has a poll out tonight. The figure's slightly better for Labour, but still in that area of mid-20s. Both polls are lower than the 25% vote Labour recorded at the last election, its worst result in 92 years. I spoke to Labour leader Andrew Little just before we came to air and started by asking him why.
I think there's been a succession of events that haven't helped. We had our kind of interns issue that didn't reflect well on us, I think, from some people, and we took a hit then. That was followed by the weekend where both Greens and New Zealand First had their conferences. They were chipping at each other, they were chipping at us. Although we had a series of announcements in the weeks that followed that, we found it difficult to get our announcements out there. Things like our families package, that was a big support, more support for families, like our fiscal plan, we made it clear that we are not the party of tax cuts. We prefer investing in things like more housing, more hospitals and health services, schools, the things that actually give people a chance, give them security, things that have been run down under this government, whose ideology is small government. So we've made those things pretty clear, but you're up against, stories about an MP who historically, on a benefit, had broken the rules, and that crowded out what we had to say.
So are you saying that were it not for Materia Ture, you would have got what you clearly regard as good news stories to more people?
I'm not. Look, the Green Party and Materia have done what they've done. She's, fessed up to something in her previous life. She's drawing attention to an issue, which is about the dignity with which people on a benefit can live. That was a big story. It's been given pretty much wall-to-wall coverage. And I guess announcements about us favouring investing in things like hospitals and schools and jobs for young people was given less treatment than, the issues surrounding Materia Ture.
When did you find out about the Comma Brunton poll? Did you find out about that on Thursday?
Comma Brunton poll, I was briefed on Friday about that.
OK, and who did you talk to? What members of caucus did you discuss the numbers with?
I spoke to a number of members of caucus. We divvied it up, a small group of us. It's not important who spoke to whom. What is important is that we briefed the caucus so everybody was aware, and we knew that with numbers like that, what was a very tough job was going to get tougher, and that this would be a tough week. We've been proven correct on that at least.
It's very difficult to find a commentator now who isn't saying, Andrew Little, what the hell were you thinking, telling us this, that you had offered essentially to stand down, that this was strategically a disastrous admission?
I have made no offer to stand down. I am a team player. I work with the team. I think I'm a pretty honest bloke, actually, and when you get the lowest poll rate that you've had in a long, long time, you have to be honest with both yourself and your team. And I said a valid option is to look at, what we do with my position. I am in that position. I am absolutely and utterly determined to fight, because the sort of things that we've been talking about, which is about schools and hospitals and jobs for young people and better mental health services, we've been talking about for months and months. Those are vital to New Zealand and its long-term future and its people. And I am very clear, and Labour is very clear. We do not want to sit aside anymore and watch more and more New Zealanders missing out and being left behind, and in the face of a government whose priority is tax cuts that give $400 million to the wealthiest people in New Zealand.
Okay.
There is a stark difference between us.
There is a stark difference, and I'm going to repeat that list back to you. Jobs for young people, schools, hospitals, mental health services. If your point of difference is your support for those things, and your support for those things is worthwhile and admirable, why are you sitting at 23 or 24%? In other words, why isn't your message getting through and appealing to more people?
Yeah, that's the big question. And I say, when you look at the media coverage in the last couple of weeks and see what has been given priority, it is those things. It was a claim by New Zealand First that we ought to abolish the Māori seat. Now, I would have done literally dozens of meetings. The last one I did was 250 people turned out for a meeting in Levin on a wet, cold Friday night last Friday. No one has ever said to me that the one thing we must do right now if we want to get more people with a roof over their heads or better mental health services or better schools is we should abolish the Māori seat. For that matter, nobody has said that, we need to take a close look at the benefit system and deal with those people who are doing it tough there.
There's a slight paradox here. On the one hand, you are being brutally honest, and people are saying, actually, it's almost self-destructively honest, that you are putting yourself up and saying, hey, maybe I'm not working out. But on the other hand, you keep referring back to this kind of default position. Were it not for Winston Peters and the Māori seats, were it not for Materia Ture, we would be getting our message through. So there is still an element of not mea culpa. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, I disagree with you because I think up until about 6 or 8 weeks ago, we were hovering around that 28, 29, 30 mark, and in fact we'd been up higher than that in earlier polls earlier this year. So we were hovering around that period there. It is in the last 6 to 8 weeks or last 6 weeks really, that we've seen that fall off in the polls. That's the reality, and I don't think anybody's disputing that. And so you've got to look over that period of time and see what's happening. I'm not abdicating responsibility for the things. I stepped up and took responsibility for what happened with the interns issue. Said we'd get that fixed and sorted out, and we did. Can't control what 2 other parties do at the weekend of their political conferences, and they did all that. But that generated a lot of heat and occasionally a bit of light as well. So that stuff is real. It happened. We kind of, when we saw what was happening, predicted we'd take a hit, and we did. And we haven't yet picked ourselves up from that.
What next? Will you lead Labour into the election?
I'm absolutely and utterly determined to do just that, because I am totally committed to being, putting up our plans that are going to make a difference for people to get their house, to get the hospital sorted, to get the school sorted. In the end, this comes down to a choice about, are we serious about closing that inequality gap? Are we going to stick, or are we going to stick with a government that is ideologically committed to small government, to trickle down to those things that are just shutting more and more people out? I'm totally determined to have that fight, because I've been fighting that for 20 years and I ain't given up now.
Andrew Little. So what do the people in the tiny west coast town, often described as Labour's birthplace, think about the current situation? This is part of our Pass the Phone Around polling, where we just talk to folk in areas where you might expect them to have an opinion on the politics of the day. In this case, it's the pub known as formerly the Blackball Hilton, where patron Russell says he's happy with his local Labour MP.
We get pretty good representation from Damien, so he's probably, you look after people that have a go at looking after you, so to speak, huh?
So that's your electorate vote taken care of for Damien O'Connor. What about your party vote?
It's sort of got to be New Zealand first, really.
Bloody hell, why is that?
Winston, keeping the bastards honest, so to speak,
Is he?
Well, the way I'm sort of seeing it, he rattles a few cages.
Are you a bit disappointed by mainstream politics, Russell?
Well, I mean, given the state of New Zealand at the present moment with the housing, homeless people, beggars on the streets, and the immigration situation, where we're bringing people into the country and we can't house our own people, you'd have to be a little bit disappointed, wouldn't you?
Thanks, Russell. Bloody good to talk to you. Is there anyone else there?
I could put you on to Phil. He's the man.
Okay.
Yeah, g'day.
Hello, who's this?
I'm the owner of the hotel.
Hello, owner of the hotel. It's John Campbell from Radio New Zealand in Auckland. How are you going?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, good. How's the Labour Party going?
Not as well as it should.
And why is that?
Too much infighting. They really haven't got any policies that are any different from National's policies. Really, they're one centre right, one centre left. It's the best of a bad bunch, really, isn't it?
So will you vote for them?
Oh, I can't answer that.
You haven't made your mind up yet, or you just don't want to lose customers?
No, I haven't made up my mind yet.
What do you want?
What do I want? I want a fair go for a small business like mine to survive. That's pretty much what I'm after. We pay more tax than anybody. Small businesses are being penalised left, right and centre for actually working.
Yeah, you're not doing base erosion and profit shifting, are you? You haven't got Apple's accountants, have you?
No, we don't. No, exactly right. We've got to count our own pennies.
Yeah. And so what would make a difference to you? What party now could say, I'm going to get your vote? What would they have to do to achieve that?
I think just give the working stiff and the small businesses a fair go.
Stop penalising us, because we always get looked over the top of, because everybody works on the poor or the rich, but they forget about the middleman.
Geez, that's just what Russell was saying.
Yeah, well, that seems to be the feeling all around the country, actually. It's, why are we picking on the working class, the people who are actually earning the money and paying the tax, and we're the ones that are getting penalised for it?
That's Phil, the owner of the pub in Blackball, which is called the pub formerly known as the Blackball Hilton, the birthplace, that tiny little West Coast town of the Labor Party. Lots of feedback coming in. Labor has no quality leader nor any depth on the bench to form a government. Lost a lot of union support when individual contracts were introduced. The Nats will win, says Gary. Please tell Andrew Little, do not resign, in caps. There are a lot of us out here that need, in caps, you. Enjoyed your talk at Kelston. I understand the poll is conducted via landline. Most Labor voters are the working poor. Do many have dispensed with the landline in order to save money, opting for mobile phones only? How can this poll be representative? A mixed response to Andrew Little and his position in the Labor Party, but lots of people are supporting him who are contacting us tonight. Thank you for your feedback. The government is scrapping the controversial decile rating system for schools, replacing it with a confidential funding system. Schools will be rated by a so-called risk index due to be in place by 2020, which will estimate the number of their students at risk of underachievement. What's it all mean? Well, the Education Minister, Nikki Kaye, says that rating will stay private and be reviewed every year.
Some parents have seen the decile number and thought that that is somehow a measurement of the school, when actually it's just a crude calibration of the socio-economic income of a particular neighbourhood. What the risk index is it is an index designed to determine how many children may be at a particular school that are at risk of not achieving.
Nikki Kaye says the specific indicators used in the index aren't finalised, but could include ethnicity, mother's age, and how much time they've been on a benefit.
There is obviously anonymised data that not even the Ministry of Education will have. Schools will be provided with their funding, but the whole point is that we don't want to turn this into a system whereby people try and use it like the decile. We're trying to shift away from that. We want to shift to a system where parents access ERO reports and strategic plans to better know how their children are doing.
Nikki Kaye, decile funding currently accounts for less than 3% of a school's resources, and Nikki Kaye is adamant no school will have their funding cut as a result of the change. Coming up to 6:22, a parent whose child was assaulted by a former daycare supervisor says her 5 months home detention simply isn't tough enough. Lynn Euphemia Abraham was found guilty of 10 of 11 charges in May for smacking children, force-feeding others and washing out a child's mouth with soap. Jessie Chang was at the Waitakere District Court for her sentencing today.
Lynn Abraham stood silently as her sentencing was read out by Judge June Jallis. A starting sentence of 12 months imprisonment was reduced to 5 months home detention. Judge Jallis said Abraham had breached the trust of parents whose children depended on her for their care and protection. She also said other workers at the daycare who witnessed the offending over a 4-year period did not speak out in fear of losing employment. However, the judge said she did not think Abraham is a risk to society and has a low chance of reoffending.
You're 59 years of age and this is the first time that you've been before the criminal court. And while the Crown rightly refers to the period of offending as detracting from the overall level of credit that you could count for good character, you are still entitled to credit for a significant number of years of good work and community service.
The children Abraham assaulted were aged from 18 months to just under 5 years old at the time. One of her victims was a 3-year-old boy with special needs. Outside the courtroom, one of the parents said Abraham deserves a harsher sentence.
Doesn't really fit the crime at all, not very happy about it, no. It's not setting a very good example for anyone that could possibly do it in the future. They'll just get off scotch-free.
The father says Abraham's actions has affected his family tremendously. Abraham has voluntarily withdrawn her teacher's registration and is no longer teaching. For Checkpoint, Ko Jessie Chang Aho.
The debate over whether Christchurch needs a covered stadium has reignited after consecutive low turnouts for two of the Crusaders' biggest games of the year. One night in particular brutally cold. The temporary AMI stadium was almost half empty for last Saturday's semi-final against the Chiefs as temperatures plummeted to -2. Even fewer turned out the previous weekend for the side's do-or-die quarter-final against the Highlanders. Rain made conditions miserable. Conan Young, who was amongst the 10,000 fans who braved conditions for that game, reports.
After a standout season from the Crusaders, the stage was set Saturday night for a semi-final showdown with Super Rugby superstars, the Chiefs. But for a second weekend in a row, the weather got in the way. Instead of it being a sellout, only 13,000 fans braved the below-zero night. One of those not put off by the cold was 87-year-old Dennis Young, who rugged up with his trusty sheepskin-lined jacket.
I bring it out in bad weather, and it qualified. So,
should we have a look?
Yeah,
Do you want to show us?
Sure. Yeah. I can hardly lift it, it's so heavy.
A little bit of cold weather was never going to stop former All Blacks hooker Dennis Young from going to this game. He's endured worse, including his first ever match for Canterbury, which just happened to be against the Lions. He was given the job of marking that side's hooker, who was also their captain, an experience he describes as frightening. But even this hardy soul believes it's time for the city to have a covered stadium. Even with his sheepskin jacket, he says being out in the open was not much fun on Saturday night.
Well, I was cold and worried at half-time because we hadn't had a lot of the game, really, in our half. Well, it was all in our half, sorry, but nothing much in our favour, but it developed, and by the time the final score came around, I was quite happy.
Just to get out of there and get warmed up?
Exactly, yes.
While the cold was the thing that kept people home at the weekend, it was the wet that did it the week before that, when chaotic weather and flooding threw the Crusaders' game against the Highlanders in jeopardy. In the build-up to last weekend's match, 15,000 seats had been sold, but just 10,000 turned up on Saturday night. This reporter was amongst them and can report it was very wet and very cold. Things were particularly rough for young families in the uncovered take-a-kid-to-footy seats, with some of the younger fans reduced to tears after it all got too much for them. It's these scenes the chief executive of the Crusaders Rugby, Hamish Riak, is keen to see the back of. He says there's a direct correlation between bad weather and low turnouts.
We could see it in our ticket sales during the week, started off pretty positively and they were selling well. And then we had a forecast that another southerly was coming through and the ticket sales just stopped. So we know that it was people thinking about the weather and thinking about their experience at the stadium.
He says the last 2 weeks are proof that the city needs a covered stadium, even if it does not turn a profit.
One of the frustrations that we often have with conversations about stadia or multi-purpose arenas is that they are expected to be economically viable, but no one expects, the town hall or the art gallery or your big public park in the middle of the city to have an economic return.
The Christchurch City Council is committed to building a new stadium at a cost of $250 million, but this has been put off until 2025. A ray of sunshine for those not happy about spending another 8 years getting wet and cold at the rugby has been provided by a pre-feasibility study the council is doing on whether the stadium should have a roof and whether it should be built sooner. The results of that are due in August. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Venezuela's president is claiming victory in the country's controversial election for a constituent assembly. The assembly will have the power to rewrite the constitution. The opposition fears it is simply a power grab by the president. The vote has not been without violence. At least 10 people are reported to have died in one of the worst days of recent political unrest. From the capital, Caracas, here's the BBC's Will Grant.
This has been an election unlike any other in Venezuela. The controversial vote was met by widespread demonstrations and became the bloodiest day in months of violent street protests. With the opposition boycotting the process, the government was always going to claim victory. Nevertheless, in some neighbourhoods, like El Matadero in the east of Caracas, there appeared to be little enthusiasm and low turnout for the vote.
For years past, in votes under Hugo Chavez, the queues would often stretch around the block.
On this occasion, the interest seems a little more subdued, as many are concerned about what it might mean for the future of Venezuela. Government loyalists, like this local candidate, insisted the process was legitimate, calling a new assembly the will of the people. But it is not the will of these people. Young protesters have spent weeks engaged in civil disobedience. Scores have died. Even as the votes were being cast and counted, they vowed to remain on the streets.
I have a 2-year-old son, and I don't want him to grow up in a world of violence and dictatorship.
Opposition leaders insist that they aren't encouraging the violence and aren't trying to drag the country down a path to further conflict.
So let's be clear, we are not fighting Venezuelans against Venezuelans. We have a real union of Venezuelan people fighting against a minority which has kidnapped the power in Venezuela.
In this broken and deeply Catholic nation, many chose to go to church instead of vote. As Mass ended, neighbours shook hands in the traditional sign of peace. Whatever the new assembly brings, it will be years before Venezuela's politicians bridge their divide.
It's the BBC's Will Grant ending checkpoint for tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A second case of the cattle disease Mycoplasma bovis has been found in South Canterbury. New questions about Andrew Little's leadership as another poll confirms a significant drop in support for the Labour Party. The government is dumping the school decile rating system and replacing it with a risk index targeting disadvantaged children. At least 75 people have been rescued from a damaged cable car suspended 40 metres above the Rhine in the German city of Cologne. And a former railway worker awarded the Victoria Cross